The snowstorm came out of nowhere. 1 minute, I was unloading bags at the cabin, and the next, the wind howled so fiercely it rattled the windows. My husband Lucian was supposed to join me, but his last-minute business trip left me stranded here. Alone, or so I thought. Cale, Lucian's son from his first marriage, showed up just before the snow trapped us. "I figured you could use some help," he said, brushing snow from his jacket. I should have said no. I should have told him to leave. But the truth? I wasn't ready to face the storm by myself. By nightfall, the power flickered out, and the cabin plunged into icy darkness. The fire was small, the blankets thinner than I remembered. "We'll freeze like this," Cale said, his voice low, his eyes fixed on me in the dim light. His words hung there, heavy and unspoken. And that's when it started, the first moment I felt it. The warmth of his body as we huddled closer beneath the covers. The shiver that wasn't from the cold. I should have pulled away. But I didn't. The fire crackled softly, but it wasn't enough. The chill seeped through the walls, wrapping around us like a vice. Cale shifted closer, his body heat chasing away the cold. "I don't think we have a choice," he said, his breath warm against my ear. "We need to stay close if we want to make it through the night." I nodded, even as my heart raced. I told myself it was survival. Nothing more. But when he pulled the blanket tighter around us, his arm brushed against mine, solid, steady, and I didn't move away. "Is this okay?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "Yes," I breathed, though I wasn't sure if I was answering his question or convincing myself. The wind roared outside, but inside, the silence grew heavier. I could feel the heat of his gaze, the tension that filled the small space between us. "It's strange," he murmured, "being here with you like this." I swallowed hard. "Strange how?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, his fingers brushing my cheek. "I never thought I'd see you this way." I should have pulled back. I should have said something to break the moment. But his touch lingered, and instead of stopping him, I leaned into it. The fire dimmed, but the heat between us flared. Cale's fingers trailed down my cheek, slow and deliberate. My breath hitched, and I hated how my body reacted. How I leaned in, craving more of his touch. "This isn't right," I whispered, but even as I said it, I didn't move away. "Then tell me to stop," he said, his voice low and rough. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I looked up at him, my pulse pounding as his eyes searched mine. The way he looked at me, like I was something he couldn't resist, made it impossible to breathe. "We're just keeping warm," he said, his lips dangerously close to mine. But we both knew it was more than that. I let out a shaky breath, and that's when he leaned in. His lips brushed mine, just once, soft and hesitant, before pulling back to see if I'd stop him. I didn't. The second kiss wasn't hesitant. It was hungry, desperate. His hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space between us. My heart pounded as his lips moved down my neck, leaving a trail of heat that made me shiver for reasons that had nothing to do with the cold. "This can't happen," I said, my voice trembling. "It already is," he murmured against my skin. And I let it. I should have pulled away. I knew it. But when Cale's lips claimed mine again, the storm outside seemed to fade, drowned out by the pounding of my heart. His hands slid down my back, strong and sure, igniting a fire that had nothing to do with survival. "We shouldn't," I whispered, even as my fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer. "Then stop me," he said, his breath hot against my neck. I couldn't. The blanket fell away as his hands roamed, exploring every inch of me with a hunger I couldn't deny. My skin burned under his touch, every nerve awake and alive. "We're going to regret this," I said, but my voice was already breaking, my resistance crumbling as his lips found mine again, deeper this time, more urgent. "Maybe," he murmured. "But not tonight." His words sent a shiver down my spine, and before I could think, his body pressed against mine, pinning me to the couch. I gasped as his hands slid under my shirt, his touch searing against my bare skin. My head tilted back, my eyes fluttering shut as his lips traced down my collarbone, leaving me breathless. The storm raged outside, but in that moment I was lost in him, lost in the heat, the danger, the thrill of what we were doing. And I didn't want it to stop. Cale's hands were everywhere, slow, deliberate, as if he wanted to memorize every inch of me. My breathing hitched when his lips brushed against my shoulder, sending a wave of heat down my spine. "This is wrong," I whispered, even as my fingers dug into his back, pulling him closer. "Then stop me," he said again, his voice rough, his eyes burning as they locked onto mine. I couldn't. His lips captured mine, deeper this time, his body pressing me back into the cushions. I arched into him, my body betraying every ounce of restraint I had left. "You feel it too," he murmured against my skin, trailing kisses down my neck. "Don't pretend you don't," I gasped when his hands slid lower, gripping my hips and pulling me against him. The heat between us was unbearable, the tension snapping as his lips found mine again. My head spun, my body trembled, and when he whispered my name, it sent a shiver straight through me. "We shouldn't," I said, my voice breaking. "But we are," he said, his breath hot against my ear. I didn't stop him. I didn't want to. The storm outside howled, but inside it was silent, just the sound of our breathing, our bodies tangled in forbidden heat. And for the first time, I didn't care about the consequences. Cale's hands gripped my waist, pulling me closer until there was no space left between us. My breath hitched as his lips trailed down my neck, leaving a burning path that made my knees weak. "You're trembling," he murmured, his voice low and rough. "It's not from the cold," I whispered, my fingers digging into his shoulders as his hands roamed lower. He paused, his eyes dark and searching. "Tell me to stop, and I will." But I couldn't. Instead, I reached up, threading my fingers through his hair and pulling his lips back to mine. The kiss deepened, raw and hungry, as his hands slid beneath my sweater, his touch igniting something primal inside me. I gasped as his fingertips traced my bare skin, sending shivers through my body. "This is dangerous," I managed to say, even as my body arched into him. "Then let's stop pretending," he said, his voice barely more than a growl. I didn't fight him when he lifted me, carrying me to the small bedroom at the back of the cabin. The firelight flickered, casting shadows that danced across the walls as he laid me down, his body pressing into mine. The storm outside raged, but all I could hear was the pounding of my heart as Cale's lips claimed every inch of me. And in that moment, nothing else mattered. The room felt smaller, the air thicker, as Cale hovered over me. His eyes searched mine, dark with hunger, but there was something else, something deeper that made it impossible to look away. "If we do this," he began, his voice husky, "there's no turning back." I swallowed hard, my pulse pounding. We already crossed that line. His lips crashed into mine, and I melted beneath him. His hands moved with purpose, peeling away layers of clothing until my skin burned under his touch. My breath caught as he pressed against me, his heat drowning out every thought except one. I wanted this. I wanted him. "You're so beautiful," he murmured, his lips tracing a path down my neck, making me shiver. I arched into him, my fingers gripping his shoulders as the tension between us snapped. Everything else, Lucian, the storm, the consequences, faded into the background. His hands explored me, every touch sending sparks through my body. When his lips found mine again, the kiss was deeper, hungrier, as if he couldn't get enough. I gasped as his body pressed into mine, his movements slow but deliberate, making me ache for more. "Cale!" His name left my lips in a whisper, and he responded by pulling me closer, his breath hot against my skin. We lost ourselves in each other, in the heat and desperation that neither of us could resist. But even as I gave in, a small voice in the back of my mind warned me. This wouldn't end well. Cale's hands gripped my hips, pulling me tighter against him. My breath hitched as his lips explored every inch of my skin, leaving me dizzy and craving more. "This shouldn't feel this good," I whispered, my voice trembling. "But it does," he murmured against my collarbone, his breath hot and unsteady. His words sent a shiver down my spine, and I knew there was no turning back. My fingers traced the muscles of his back, memorizing the way he felt against me, solid, strong, and completely forbidden. The sheets tangled around us as he moved, slow and deliberate, drawing out every sensation until I was gasping his name. His touch burned, his kisses lingered, and my body responded to every movement, every sound. "Tell me you want this," he said, his voice low and demanding. I looked into his eyes, my heart racing. "I do." His lips captured mine again, more urgent this time, and I surrendered completely. The storm outside seemed to echo the chaos inside me, wild, unpredictable, and unstoppable. But even as we gave in to the heat between us, a knot tightened in my stomach. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a secret, a dangerous one that could shatter everything. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to stop. The morning light streamed through the cracks in the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. Cale stirred beside me, his arms still wrapped around my waist, holding me close. For a moment, I let myself sink into the warmth, pretending the world outside didn't exist. But reality came crashing back the second I heard the low rumble of an engine outside. "Lucian!" I jolted upright, my heart racing. Kale, wake up, I hissed, shaking him. He blinked, his eyes still heavy with sleep. What's wrong? Lucian's here, I whispered, panic lacing my voice. Kale sat up immediately, his expression darkening. Shit. We scrambled out of bed, throwing on clothes as fast as we could. My hands shook as I straightened the sheets, trying to erase any trace of what had happened. But nothing could erase the way my lips still tingled from his kiss, or the way my body still burned from his touch. The front door opened just as Kale stepped out of the bedroom, his hair still tousled. Lucian's eyes landed on him, narrowing immediately. What's going on here? Lucian's voice was sharp, his gaze flicking between us. My stomach dropped. Nothing, I said too quickly, my voice cracking. Lucian's eyes lingered on Kale's rumpled clothes, and suspicion flashed across his face. You two look comfortable, he said, his voice cold and measured. I opened my mouth to respond, but Kale cut in. We were just talking. The storm kept us up all night. Lucian's jaw tightened, and I saw the doubt in his eyes. He didn't believe us. I could feel it, the tension, the weight of what we had done hanging in the air like a dark cloud. And for the first time, I realized just how close we were to losing everything. Lucian's eyes burned into me, searching for answers I couldn't give. My pulse pounded so loudly I thought he could hear it. Talking, he said, his voice sharp. That's all it was? Kale stood taller, his shoulders squared. Yes, he said firmly. We were just talking, trying to stay warm during the storm. Lucian's gaze flicked between us, and I saw the cracks in his composure, the doubt, the anger simmering just beneath the surface. You're lying. His words hit me like a slap, and I froze. I'm not, I whispered, but the tremble in my voice betrayed me. Lucian stepped closer, his eyes locked on mine. I trusted you, Lyra. I trusted both of you. I swallowed hard, guilt clawing at my throat. Lucian, please. Don't, he snapped, cutting me off. I don't want to hear it. Kale stepped in front of me, his jaw tight. You don't get to talk to her like that. Lucian's eyes widened in disbelief. Are you serious right now? You're defending her? Yes, Kale said, his voice steady. Because I care about her. The room fell silent. Lucian's face twisted with betrayal, and the weight of our actions hit me like a wave. I can't believe this, Lucian said, stepping back. You, both of you, you've ruined everything. Tears stung my eyes, but I didn't move. I couldn't. Lucian turned to Kale, his voice colder than I'd ever heard it. Get out. Now. Kale's hand brushed against mine, a fleeting touch that sent my heart racing one last time, before he nodded and walked out the door without another word. I wanted to follow him. Every part of me screamed to go after him. But I didn't. I stayed, frozen in place as Lucian's stare pinned me to the floor. Was it worth it? He asked, his voice breaking. I didn't have an answer. The end, or is it?